Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're going to take a look at thick irons. A lot of people like upgrading to them, but sometimes they don't work. Let's look at some of the problems you might have if you're going to do that. If you ever want to start a really interesting argument, tell people that thick irons are much better than thin irons. For hundreds or thousands of years, thick irons were the norm. But then with the advent of metal body planes and fine gold adjusters, Stanley found that, if you make it thinner, it's faster to sharpen. There's less metal you have to take off. And that was a selling point, is that, yeah, we have a thinner iron that you can sharpen faster. But the argument now is that a thicker iron has less chatter, less vibration. Even with a good chip breaker or a cap iron to thicken it up, thin iron sometimes is a little bit flexible. In this video, I'm not going to go into the testing to see which one is actually better. I might be doing a video on that here soon. But I would say definitely go take a look at Rex Kruger. He has a video on it that really goes well into the detail of which one is actually better. I'll leave a link to that one down below. But the problem comes when you say, yes, I do want to take my antique Stanley and put in a thicker iron. A lot of them will go in there fine, but some of them are so thick that you run into a few problems. Now, most of the modern planes, Lee-Nielsen, Veritas, Wood River, if they're worth their salt, they generally come with a thicker iron. It doesn't cost that much more to put a thicker iron in there, and there's an added benefit to it. So they're going to be set up and designed for that. But with antiques, they're designed and set up for these thinner irons. And unfortunately, a little bit of thickness comes to three common problems. Number one, the mouth is too small, and when you put the iron in, the tip runs into the front of the mouth, and it won't actually protrude out. Number two, sometimes the yoke doesn't stick far enough forward. So when I put the iron in, and then I bring in the chip breaker on top of that, the chip breaker won't actually engage with the yoke and it just slides over it. Number three, sometimes the screw isn't quite long enough to reach through the iron and engage into the chip breaker. And it just doesn't quite catch, and there's not enough to hold it on. So let's take these three problems and go with them one by one. Number one, the mouth. The obvious answer is you grab a file, you stick it in there, and you file the mouth bigger. And that's, in my opinion, it's kind of like the nuclear option. In some cases, that works. And on this particular plane, that is what I chose to do because I wanted this set up for a thicker iron in a particular setting. And in that case, it made sense to do it to this plane. The easier answer, and in my opinion, the better answer, is actually just to move the frog back. The farther back it gets, that means you have more space for the mouth. Now you'll hear some people say that this bed needs to be perfectly in line with this small piece of body underneath. And in all honesty, it doesn't matter. The iron never touches this small piece of body. Because the plane is beveled down, the bevel, particularly with a thicker iron, lifts it away from that, so the bevel doesn't touch it. So this body can actually move back beyond where that is at. It doesn't have to be in line with it. That gives you a little more freedom to move the plane back and forth. With a thinner iron, you have to be careful that that frog is fairly close to the front, otherwise you're going to be running into the bevel. But with the thinner iron, you're not going to have a problem of it running into the front of the mouth. With a thicker iron, you can actually move the frog back farther than you can with a thinner iron. But then sometimes you move it back so far that the screw starts running into the front of that hole and you can't move it back any farther because you can't get the screw in. The easy answer to that is you can come in with a rat tail file and file the front of that hole a little farther forward. That will allow the screw to slide farther forward and the frog to slide farther back. Usually just moving the frog back or making modifications to the screw holes is more than enough to get a fat iron through a mouth. But if you've moved the frog back as far as it'll go and it's still running into the front of the mouth, that's when you kind of got to go with the nuclear option and file the front of the mouth forward. Take it slow, do it pass by pass, try the iron, do a few more passes, try the iron, take your time, and it'll actually work really well. And I really like it on this one because I have it set up for a specific thicker iron, and it works well for that. Problem number two is this yoke. Sometimes it's just not quite thick enough. If I put this iron in here, it's just barely sticking up past this iron. And that'll work most of the time. In this particular application, it has just enough to catch it. But if I start moving it to its extremity a little bit farther up or a little bit farther down, it will release, and now the yoke can't push the chip breaker back and forth, and I can't adjust this. So the yoke should be sticking out a little bit farther. If it were a perfect world, the yoke would actually stick out flush with the outside of this, or even a little bit farther than flush with the outside of the chip breaker. And that is where Jeff from Reed Planes came out with the file to fit yoke. And this yoke is a little bit larger than all dimensions. It's longer than it needs to be, so it'll stick out a good bit farther. It doesn't have a hole, so you can actually adjust that to exactly what you want. And the nubs on this are even too large, so you can fit those to adjust to your depth nut. And what that'll do is it'll take out all that slop. So when you have that yoke that moves all over the place and you've got 3 turns before it engages and then 3 turns back the other way before it engages, you can take out all that slop by making this match your plane perfectly. I have one put in here with my smoother, and this one is fit for a really thick Lie-Nielsen iron. And then I've got this thicker chip breaker that comes through, and it's actually sticking out a little bit past, and that's right where I want it to be, but it's a fully engaged, so no matter how far I move the adjustment, that yoke still stays engaged. But it's still low enough that I can fit this on, pop it down in place, and it's not interfering with the lever cap. The problem is that every plane out there is different, and so you can't sell a yoke for every plane and every type of Stanley, so these are larger in all dimensions. So you have to do a bit of work, and for me it took around an hour or so to fit it perfectly, but now that I do, it's really nice and tight. There's almost no slop. I've got about a 1/16 of a turn, if that, between engaging in either direction. It's a really nice addition, and it allows you to use those really thick irons that your regular yokes won't stick through for. I have a whole video going into how to fit it and how to actually shape it, so if you want to see that, I'll leave a link to that down below, as well as where you can purchase the yokes. The last problem is you need a screw to go through your iron and engage with your chip breaker to hold the two of them together. However, the original one that comes with the Stanley isn't quite long enough for some of those thick irons, and it won't reach the threads on the other side. Which is really annoying. Now the nice thing is the thread is just a standard 5/16, 5/16/18, and you can sight it through there, it's fine. So what you can do is take the bolt, cut it down, put a slot in there, make some modification to it, and you can make a bolt that will work for you. But that's a decent amount of pain. And I might sound like a broken record right now, but Jeff came to the rescue again, and he said, well, okay, I'll make bolts that fit it. And these are larger. They've got the knurling for the thumb. They've got a slot for the driver. They are longer than they need to be, so you can file them back to exactly the size you need for yours, or you can leave it a little longer if you've got the space to fit it. And you can see, even with this thick Lie-Nielsen iron, there's enough space for this to go all the way through and still stick out the other side, even with this thicker chip breaker. It's got all the space it needs, and it's got a little bit extra. And even with the older chip breaker, it's going to stick out a ways, but you can always file it off if that becomes a problem. And even in this case, with it sticking all the way through on that thicker chip breaker, it's still not hitting the lever cap above it, so I wouldn't even need to file that one. And in all honesty, I've tried it on all of my planes and some of my backstock planes, and I've never had a case where I've had to file it down. But if you needed to, it's not that hard to do. And here you can see the close-up between the one from Jeff with Reed planes and the original one out of my Stanley. There's a good bit of difference in the thread length, so it'll work for any replacement iron out there. And so the real question, are thicker irons better? I'll leave that for the argument. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do a comprehensive data test on it and see. But in all honesty, I actually like using a thicker iron. It feels good. The problem is sometimes you fit it into the plane and you run into problems. So I hope this helped you to figure out moving the mouth, adjusting the yoke, or you might need to get a bigger screw to fit it. There are lots of different ways you can make these work, and just have a little bit of fun, and you might find you enjoy a thicker iron. So I'll leave down below a link to Rex's video comparing them, as well as the iron test I've done in the past, and links to the screw and yoke, so if you want to pick those up, you can. If you have any questions, or is there something that I missed, is there some other problem that I didn't talk about, or some other solution to one of the problems I didn't talk about, please let me know in the comments down below. I love hearing that, and a lot of times I learn some great stuff from that. So thank you. You're helping me, you're helping the community, and that means a lot. Anytime you do hit like, comment, share, subscribe, you help out the channel. You help us get in front of more people and help the algorithm grow the channel. Thank you, that means a lot. As well as you'll notice there are a bunch of names over here. Those are all of the fantastic, wonderful, benevolent, and gorgeous people over on Patreon. Without patrons, we wouldn't exist. We are completely sponsored by patrons, as well as members here on the channel. People who've clicked that little join button down below, thank you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be here. You keep the lights on, you keep the channel going. So if you'd like to keep the channel going and help us out with that, you can find out more about Patreon in the doobly-doo down there, or click the little join button and become a member here on YouTube. We have special perks for both. So I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Everybody wants a bigger yoke. Everyone wants a bigger screw. Everyone wants a bigger mouth. I mean, you'd think modern hand planes were made in Texas.